Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I'm glad to welcome you all at the third section of our conference, devoted to intercultural communication and interpretation issues. Добрый день, уважаемые коллеги, еще раз. Рада всех вас поприветствовать на продолжении нашей конференции в рамках третьей секции, посвященной межкультурным коммуникациям и проблемам перевода и переводоведения. Let me introduce the head of this section, Юрий Александрович Муравьев, Senior Lecturer of the Department of Foreign Languages Theory and Practice at the Institute of Foreign Languages of RUDN University. Позвольте представить руководителя данной секции Муравьева Юрия Александровича, старшего преподавателя кафедры теории и практики иностранных языков Института иностранных языков РУДН. Вам предоставляется слово. Пожалуйста, Юрий Александрович.
Okay, again, would you please, thank you very much for this intro. Could you please put the screenshot of the, of our session so that the guests might have access to it? Okay, welcome to this section 3. Well, hopefully this will be interesting not only for translators, but also for all specialists in foreign languages. So we would be glad to invite you to share your thoughts, ideas, and questions. So please, after any report, after any speaker, don't hesitate to ask questions, please. And you may also write your questions to the chat, freely. So thank you very much, Irina Evgenievna, and let's first ask those who are present to introduce themselves. So please, if you have a sequence, so Irina Evgenievna, would you please introduce the sequence of speakers? Again, could you please introduce this? Oh yeah, we have a speaker, the first speaker. So this will be Natalia Plak, Northern Arctic Federal University, named after Romanosov, Arkhangelsk. Let's ask Ms. Plak to start if she's ready. Well, if not, we'll ask someone else to start. Okay, so please.
Yes, I'm ready and here.
Yes, so you're most welcome to speak in this section. So please.
Can you see the presentation?
Yeah, we see it, but it's the final slide. It's the final slide. So if you can, would you please just start from the very beginning, and that's it.
And what about now?
Now still, I'm seeing the final slide now. So if you can, please, could you please scroll up?
But I see. Well.
Maybe we'll.
Let me start again.
Oh yeah, that's still.
So can you see the title?
Well, sadly, still some technical issues, so we can't see the title, but at least I can see it. Irina Evgenievna, can you see the title? Maybe you can help us with streaming.
I'll try. Just a second, please.
Could you please start the presentation? And Natalia, if you need the next slide, could you please just say next slide, and that will be the next slide.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I can see it now. Well, Natalia, could you please start?
Thank you. The topic of my today's presentation is semi-complex sentences with the informs in medical discourse, challenges for neural machine translation. The problem of English homonymous informs, participles, gerunds, verbal nouns is not only the subject of theoretical analysis, but also a real challenge for translation practice, especially machine translation. Wide use of semi-complex sentences containing clauses with informs in English medical text is related to the language economy principles. Most of them function as reduced subordinate clauses. Next slide. Thank you. The semi-composite sentence is to be defined as a sentence with more than one predictive line, which are expressed in fusion. For most part, one of these lines can be identified as a leading or dominant, the others making the semi-predicative expansion of the sentence. The expanding semi-predicative line in the minimal semi-composite sentence is either wholly fused with the dominant, complete predicative line of the construction, or partially fused with it being weakened as a result of the fusing derivational transformation. The semi-complex sentence displays an intermediary syntactic character between the complex sentence and the simple sentence. Its immediate syntagmatic structure, surface structure, is analogous to that of an expanded simple sentence, since it possesses only one completely expressed predicative unit. Its derivational structure, deep structure, on the other hand, is analogous to that of a composite sentence, because of its derived from two or more completely predicative units, its base sentences. The human brain is able to understand those constructions through appealing to deep structures of the sentences. The next slide, please. As for informs in English language, there are different forms of different parts of speech that have ing as an ending. There are non-finite forms of verbs such as participle one and gerund. The issue of whether these categories should be distinguished or not is still under discussion. The main reason for treating participles as a separate category is that the consistence of which participles are the head stands in distributional correspondence to an adjective phrase, a property not shared by gerunds. In addition, ing could be the suffix of a verbal noun. Unlike the gerund, the verbal noun can be used with an article and modified by adjectives. Moreover, it has a plural form and cannot take a direct object. In terms of machine translation, all of the above cause the problem of grammatical and lexical grammatical homonymy, which cannot always be solved using only formal distinctive features. Another problem is the structure of a semi-complex sentence itself, often causing machine translation errors. The next slide. There is a certain field where semi-complex sentences are widely used, as they represent the way of compression and economy of speech. Time is especially valuable in medical discourse. According to the researchers mentioned in the Handbook of Discourse Analysis, the meaning of the term discourse falls into three categories: anything beyond the sentence, language use, and a broader range of social practice that includes non-linguistic and non-specific instances of language. Medical discourse is the discourse in and about healing, curing, or therapy, expressions of suffering, and relevant language ideologies. The next slide. The peculiarities of the medical discourse include specificity of the goal, to help, to cure, to inform, leading to a variety of syntactic constructions, forms of subjunctive mood, if or when constructions. It is that use of constructions with modal verbs and so on. Specificity of temporal relations, limited time, here and now approach leading to compression, prevalence of semi-complex sentences over complex ones, secondary predicative structures, and non-finite verbs. The next slide. In order to investigate semi-complex sentences with ing forms in medical discourse from the perspective of machine translation, we analyzed 5 medical research articles. The features of the article as a genre include impersonality leading to the use of formal subjects, predominance of non-finite verbs, combination of scientific and journalistic style leading to complicated internal structure and inversion. Clear structure, introduction, methodology, result in discussion, leading to presence of cliches, different means of cohesion within each part, syntactic heterogeneity, and limited volume, leading to, again, to compression. The next slide. While conducting the study, we used both manual and computational methods. Cometrics is a computational tool that produces indices of the linguistic and discourse representations of the text. These values can be used in many different ways to investigate the cohesion of the explicit text and coherence of the mental representation of the text. The definition of cohesion used by authors of this tool consists of characteristics of the explicit text that play some role in helping the reader mentally connect ideas in the text. Neural machine translation, or NMT, is a machine translation approach that applies a large artificial neural network toward predicting the likelihood of a sequence of words, often in the forms of whole sentences. The analysis of translation errors is a human evaluation method for judging and measuring machine translation quality. The next slide. 5 medical research articles on topics related to different spheres such as lifestyle medicine, vaccination, intensive care, medical ethics, and speech therapy were analyzed. In terms of informs, text 1 contains 46 ing words and is 3.4%. Text 2 contains 100 ing words, which is 2.9%. Text 3 contains 89 ing words, and text 4 66 ing words, and text 5 94. The texts were processed using Cometrics. Then the texts were translated into Russian using prompt neural NMT system with the medical profile, and the analysis of translation errors was implemented. Next slide. Cometric tool analyzes the text by the number of parameters. We have chosen 5 parameters which are relevant to the study. In the table, there are quantitative results for each text. Numerical values in bold reveal the complexity of the text. Our hypothesis was that the text containing more complex sentences with informs would be less syntactically simple, have deeper cohesion together with a higher readability and gerund density. But in reality, their results are rather ambiguous. This may be attributed in part to the fact that the Q-metrics tool was invented for the purpose of evaluating the text's cohesion and simplicity for humans. Being sophisticated for theoretical analysis, semi-complex sentences with informs are not considered to be difficult for a human to understand, as the ability to decompress the structures is innate for most of us. But that is not the case for the machine translation. Next slide. In order to evaluate the quality of neural machine translation on semi-complex sentences with informs, we identify the ways the system uses to express them in Russian. In the example presented on the slide, NMT copes with translating informs, and the structure is quite clear. English semi-complex sentence of nominal phrase complication with gerund was translated as simple sentence with complicated subject expressed by noun phrase, and it could be one of the possible NMT patterns. The next one. But here we can see that this pattern can lead to mistake. The NMT system used the noun phrase «внимательное слушание» that is not normally used in Russian. This can be evaluated as a usage error. Next one. As for the semi-complex sentences with participle one of the NMT patterns would be preserving the participle in Russian text, and in some cases it really works. Next slide. But also not always. This example represents the case when the participle is wrongly used, making the sentence illogical. This can be evaluated as a syntax and logic error. The next slide, please. There are certain cases when NMT used different approaches to translating semi-complex sentences with informs. Not all of them are appropriate. Here we see the semi-complex sentence of nominal phrase complication with gerund translated in Russian as complex sentence with noun in subordinate clause. It needs to be emphasized that NMT system tried to extend the compressed structure, but unfortunately the translation contained wrong logical links, distorting the meaning of the sentence. This can be evaluated as a lexical grammatical error. The next slide, please. Sometimes, but not as usual, NMT system copes with decompressing the sentence. For instance, here the semi-complex attributive complication with the adverb plus participle one is translated into Russian as complex sentence with the modal verb plus infinitive in subordinate clause. And if we pay attention only to a translation of the inform, we can say that it was a successful transformation. But overall quality of the translation, of course, needs to be improved. The next slide, please. In conclusion, I would like to say that the study found that semi-complex sentences with informs are frequently used in medical research articles, contributing in diversity but not always complication of grammatical structure. Gerunds and verbal nouns are more typical for medical discourse due to prevalence of noun phrases over verb phrases. Cometrics tool did not reveal the significant level of complexity of chosen medical articles for humans. Nevertheless, the neural machine translation system struggled to find the correct translation for some of semi-complex sentences. It demonstrated some patterns in translating informs from English into Russian, in some cases potentially causing mistakes. NMT system usually cannot cope with decompression because it requires mental operation. A number of frequent word combinations, however, have their own patterns in neural machine translation, presumably due to their existence in NMT translation memory. But overall quality of the machine translation needs to be improved. For further research, we plan to increase the amount of text as well as diversity of medical genres and use different neural machine translation and other tools for natural language processing. Thank you for the attention.
Natalia, thank you very much for your, as I think, well, very in-depth study of limitations of MT translation in English for specific purposes. Well, if anyone has any questions, I have one, but first, the audience. Well, dear colleagues, do you have any questions to Natalia? Well, if not, then I have a question. So if you don't mind, Natalia, I specialize in legal translation. The problems are, well, virtually the same in machine translation. So we also have deep structure, we also have surface structure, and we also have problems with revealing the machine translation. So natural language processing and ESP is, well, one of the major tasks. So the question is, so in legal English, we have this formula of translation, you see, formula, like chunks or collocations that are, well, commonly translated and more or less standardized. Does medical English have anything like that?
Thank you for the question. Well, yes, sometimes there are certain collocations or something like that. For example, in writing medical documents or something similar. But in medical articles, I think that every author tries to explain his or her approach or something something new they review in their own style, and they are rather different. Even if we analyze the articles on just one medical topic, we have very different authors. And the another problem is that many of these articles are written by people who know English not very well, so contain sometimes even mistakes.
It happens in legal English too sometimes, but the problem is just like vice versa. The native speakers draft, well, in heavy legalese, basically because they know it, and so like those who are non-native speakers tend to use simplified structures. Okay, thank you very much. That was a very interesting presentation. Well, Irina Evgenievna, well then let's ask our next speaker to start. As I see.
Of course. Natalia Viktorovna Shurik, are you here to continue?
I see also Alexander Kaplunenko as a guest. Well,
yes, Alexander. Hello, Alexander Mikhailovich Kaplunenko will present our report.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
We welcome you at this conference at the People's Friendship University of Russia. So, would it be more comfortable for you if Irina Evgenievna streams the presentation? Or okay, I see it now. Okay, thank you very much.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Well,
I'd rather have you work the presentation, and I'll deal with the text, okay?
So, Irina Evgenievna, could you please just click the next slide if it's necessary? Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, here's a comprehensive formula of our approach to the key problem. As it were, ideological penumbra around the political discourse is structured by the manipulator into a set of stereotypes that govern the perception of both the meaning and the expression of any conventional political message. So this is our research truth, so to speak. Can we have the next slide, please? Right, we have found that current hybrid wars have involved translation, but full text, faithful translations of political texts have been ousted by political commentaries. That's for one. And therefore, we have to deal with TL texts where the SL context undergoes reframing in accordance with the relevant TL culture stereotypes. Quotations from the CL text, that is science, in fact, either get reframed to fit those stereotypes or get translated but acquire new senses compliant with the stereotypes. Can I have the next slide, please? Right, our research method is based on the Peircean conception, and here is a reminder of his semiotic triangle. Take a note of the three interpretants in the right corner because it's the key concept. Can I have the next slide, please? Now, let's consider the results as we apply the instrument of the interpretant to the translation context. Okay. From now on, we have been doing our best to apply this conception to the context of the sign as well. Can we have the next slide? Let me give my comments about the three types of interpretants. The immediate interpretant evolves as soon as I first look at the text I have been assigned to as a professional translator. Well, I assess it as either matter of fact or challenging. I'm aware of its genre and so on, generally of very common and superficial detail. My dynamic interpretant evolves as I find out features of the style and of the cultural context of the text, the latter being of special significance. All in all, appropriate awareness comes as a result of a qualitative pre-translational analysis. And the final interpretant, or the final context, evolves when my dynamic interpretant goes commensurate with the way most of the native speakers or readers of the CL text interpret that text, and therefore that context. Next slide, please. Here I will point out to those sign-to-context relations responsible for some ambiguities and alternatives of interpretation. Familiar sign coupled with familiar context is an ideal setting in which the translator feels absolutely at ease. Unfamiliar context may encompass familiar sign. In this case, the translator most probably is faced with a new meaning of the familiar sign. Now, unfamiliar sign in a familiar context is dealt with either through contextual disambiguation of the meaning of the sign or with a tip from a dictionary, which is Google these days. Unfamiliar sign in unfamiliar context requires a more profound and broad at the same time study of the context as a cultural entity. It's the most challenging situation, in particular for the interpreter who has no time for such study. Thus, we have at least 4 basic variants of sign-to-context relations, all of them relevant in case the principle of cooperation is at work. Alas, the latter isn't the way manipulative techniques work. Can we have the next slide, please? This slide just supports my previous statement. Let's go to the next slide. Next slide, please. We have detected and put to scrutiny 3 manipulative techniques typical of the political commentaries which involve translation. In particular, coverage of Vladimir Putin's public speech by the Western media is well indicative of those techniques. Here is what Putin answered to one of the questions in the course of his great annual press conference in 2018. And to add to this quotation, he used the classical argumentum ad rem to refer to the fact that the opposition prefers street demos and riots to moving any cogent program that might work for the welfare of the country. Next slide, please. We suggest Putin's answer be semantically and pragmatically summarized in the following macro proposition. Well, macro proposition is a very popular instrument for summarizing the sense, summarizing the meaning, the content of any text. Here what we suggest. Right, now let's go to the next slide. And here is what a smart guy of the Telegraph team has tailored from the parts of the CL text, plus the bits of his own imagination. The translation presents Putin as a hardcore bureaucrat. Look at this. It's not my job to raise competitors. Can you fancy Putin say so? I don't. The translation presents Putin as a hard pure bureaucrat for one, which the president has never been. And next, the guy adds a reference to Navalny and his men, not mentioned by Putin at any point in his speech, because Navalny and company have become a stereotype that filters any information about political opposition in Russia. That stereotype has been voiced in this text, and the whole text is an illustration of a radical reframing of both the sign and the context, the first manipulative technique at work. Here it is. Okay, next slide, please. Thus, here's the final context of the TL message, that is, macro proposition, manipulatively translated and commented. What comes out from the comment? Let's have the next slide, please. The next quotation is from Putin's address to the Valdai Club annual conference in 2017, I believe. Take note of his final comment. Look at that bold-faced text in the end that reads, or rather they think they move them in their favor, rather they think it, believe. Now, can we have the next slide, please? Here is our macro proposition reflective of Putin's final context of interpretation. Take a note of wishful thinking. That's how we can interpret his final part of the text in the previous slide. Can we have the next slide? The Guardian has a reputation of a more or less balanced Western media source. Not in our case, though. Look, they've scrapped a very important reference to the ambitions of the Western politicians as wishful thinking. However, they added a reference to another pervasive stereotype, one that assesses Putin and his foreign policy through the prism of his strategic alliance with the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. And Assad is the stereotypical terror master of the Middle East in all Western media. So the final context of the Guardian's concoction comes out as follows. Let's have the next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah. That's a typical two-quarky argument, tit for tat, so to speak, a product of the partial reframing of the sign plus radical reframing of the context. Okay, let us have the next slide, please. The last quotation, oh, that's Putin's, yes. The last quotation is from Putin's address to the Federal Assembly on the 1st of March 2018. Right on the heels of his call for attention, I think we need to return to the previous slide, please, because this is a macro proposition. Yes, yes, that's what Putin said. Thank you. And right on the heels of his call for attention, this one, you listen to us now, he disclosed the details of unique state-of-the-art weaponry that had put the Russian army 10 to 15 years ahead of any other competitive military power. Thus, his macro proposition is this. Now, the next slide, please. Yes, this is his micro proposition. Now that we are miles ahead of you, will you remain loyal to your old policy? Next slide, please. The last quotation. Yeah. Just a minute. Excuse me. 16, 17. Oh, yes. Here is a USA commentary that totally reframes the SL context, but preserves faithful translation of "you listen to us now." Then consider the reference to Russia's complaints. The master manipulator denies the original, its meaning of reprimand. But has anybody ever heard Putin complain? Not Putin, and not in public, that is. But if you insert complaint for reprimand, you play down Putin's political significance. You describe him as one who may complain about, but may not rebuke the only superpower activities. That's one stereotype. And another one is an absolute geographic mess, if not idiocy, with the American missiles in Europe, which allegedly target Iran and North Korea. Gee, in spite of its obvious absurdity, this stereotype seems to work in the USA. And to complete our analysis, the commentator claims awareness of the Pentagon experts of the precedentless Russian weaponry. Lies, damn lies, as one good bestseller of the 1970s claimed. Let's have the next slide, please. And here, again, Putin looms as a bad guy due to the radically reframed SL context in the TL text. So it's the third manipulative technique that we disclose. Let's have the next slide. Given what we have found out about manipulative techniques that involve translation, their effect is largely, if not exclusively, navigated by ways of reframing the SL context. This is the key point of our research. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Alexander Mikhailovich. That was a really in-depth coverage of the distortions, reframings, and, well, other forms of media manipulation that we have of Russian officials and the Western media in general. So thank you very much. So does anyone have any questions concerning this report or this presentation? Well, and I have a question. Alexander Mikhailovich, well, speaking about forms of bias in translation, well, can we say that, well, structural, speculative, and misquoting bias is something new, or has it always been like that? So, did we have periods where, well, these distortions were relatively, like, not that obvious, so to say? Or, well, can we trace some, well, history behind that?
Well, I can recall the times because I've been in translation for half a century, right? And I remember the time when political speeches were faithfully translated, and they were open to any general audience, you know. But now, yeah, it's a strong political bias whenever we translate anything. We reframe the original context so that we get an absolutely different message, way, way different from the original one. I think it's the last 20 years or so, probably especially obvious this trend has become from Putin's, it's very famous speech, 2007 on the 10th of February in Munich. It's a turning point in the West attitude to Russia, to our country. And this is when they really grew very biased.
Okay, thank you very much. So we see that 2007 marks the threshold of all this. So when selective bias, speculative bias, well, other forms of bias were, really obvious.
It's a part of hybrid war. That's what we're having. Hybrid war.
Well, and speaking about translation in general, so are there any expectations? Can it change in any foreseeable future, or shall we see the worsening of this, well, biased and misquoting and whatnot in political translation? As for forecasts, maybe as a really experienced specialist, you may well offer some insights into the future. So what might happen next? Might we face some more balanced coverage in the years to come, or is it just, well, wishful thinking?
Translators have to follow their masters, the master speakers whom they translate, of course. And it's a question of changing the political attitudes. Probably we're exposed to a very unexpected environment now. Whoever thought that COVID would happen over this year? And I think COVID has already changed some of the attitudes, at least in Europe. Of course, it's a bad turn, isn't it? We are winning by the cost of pandemic. But let's hope that we will turn for the better in the future. Not so near as future. I think pretty distant future.
So we can't expect any forms of like less speculative bias in the years to come. Well, thank you very much. I'm really impressed by this presentation because of the examples that are so blatant, so obvious, and still so distorting the original speech. Well, thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions? If not, well, let's ask the next group of speakers. Thank you very much, Alexander Mikhailovich. The next group of speakers will be Elena Vladimirovna, Yulia Vladimirovna. Well, can you hear me? Should
Yes, of course.
Yeah, should I stream your presentation, or well, will it be more convenient for you to stream it?
Please stream it, because I am working from not a laptop but a tablet.
Okay, no problem. No problem. Well, we'll just start translating it. I will just start streaming it in a couple of seconds. Just a moment, please. I have just received it, so please, that's it. So we see this this presentation. Just a moment. Yeah. Well.
Yeah, I've sent it to you.
Just a moment, please. I'm starting the streaming. Well, hopefully you can see it.
Yeah.
Well,
I can see.
Let's full screen it, and then, well, please start and say next slide if you need the next slide, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the introduction, and good afternoon, everybody. And first of all, I must say that we are happy to take part in this conference, a most exciting one. And when I say we, I don't mean the we of a czar, but I mean myself and my colleague and co-author of this paper, with whom we work together on this research, Yulia Sergaeva. In this talk, we aim to illustrate an incredible richness and flexibility of words, which evolve to adapt to new historical and ideological situations. And in that part, we shall echo a little the previous speaker. For this purpose, we shall consider the case of one word having traveled widely through time and space. Our story, please, next slide. Our story starts with the Russian word tsar, which, according to Fasmer's etymological dictionary, derives from the Latin word Kaiser and was borrowed into Russian from Greek to refer to foreign rulers. It was only in 1547 that the Russian ruler Ivan IV adopted the title for himself, opening the next page in the word's history as a Russian cultural term. Paradoxically, the story of this word's counterpart in English starts at about the same time. In this talk, we shall trace how the term evolved first in the Russian language, reflecting the Russian turbulent history. Then we shall have a look at what happened in the Anglophone world, and then we shall compare how the counterparts actually behaved and developed in these languages, and hopefully this comparison will allow us to answer some fundamental questions. Next slide, please. So let's focus on the history of Tsar in Russian. As has already been mentioned, the Russian word Tsar entered the language as a borrowing, but has been for centuries already in circulation as a specific cultural term, idioculturonym. Being pegged onto the country's political history, it could not but reflect the changes in it. With some degree of schematization, we shall identify three distinct stages in the word's history. Stage 1, pre-Soviet or Tsarist Russia. The term was used to refer to the Russian monarch. Reflecting the linguocultural concept behind it, it had a markedly positive connotation, since the concept actually included such components as the ruler being wise and kind by definition. And we can see the connotation very vividly in such usages as Tsar-Batyushka. And it is also very vivid in this writing from Fazil Iskander. «Мне нестерпимо горько. Что-то похожее я испытал, когда однажды отец мне сказал, что царь был плохим человеком». The character is suffering from the deconstruction of the deeply rooted cultural concept of the kind and wise Tsar. And quite early, the term came to be used metaphorically to refer to things great, grand, grandiose, as in such instances as Tsar Pushka. Stage 2. After the Russian Revolution, the society faced a radical re-evaluation. And this resulted in the reversal of connotation associated with Tsar in both literal and metaphorical meanings. So compare in this example. Такого приказа не то что царь, но и татары и немецкие оккупанты не подписывали. Here, the term finds itself in quite an unusual company of Russia's worst enemies. The metaphorical model, meaning the greatest or largest of its kind, continues in its use, but here we also see a change in connotation because it is now very often used ironically, where the meaning of the model, of the construction, comes in conflict with the context. For example, примерно столько же энергии выделилось при взрыве крупнейшей водородной бомбы, царь-бомбы. And stage 3. In the recent years, the term has suffered yet another resemantization, once again mirroring the change on the political scene, and it came to be applied to the country's post-Soviet leaders. Now it is on a regular basis being applied to the current President Vladimir Putin. Next slide, please. We shift the focus to English, where the Russianism Tsar entered the language twice. It first entered it as CZAR in 1555, and that was in translation of Herberstein's notes on the Muscovites. And thus we see that CZAR is a Latin-mediated borrowing. And then around a century later, another entrance followed as TSAR. The earlier borrowing traveled from Britain to America and became standard there, while in Britain it was replaced by the later direct borrowing. Next slide. The regional distribution I have just mentioned is confirmed by the data from the corpus of global web-based English, which you can see in this table. We shall not abuse your attention with too many figures, but the data taken from the British National Corpus is quite consistent with this observation. Yet, even with this regional distribution, the situation flavors strongly of redundancy. Why does English need two synonymous Russianisms if Russianisms in general are very much in the periphery? The answer is, it doesn't, of course, need two words in one and the same exotic meaning. And the fact that it has and makes use of them indicates that they have developed some kind of usefulness. The terms in question have actually diverged in meaning and usage, and the data in the table indicates it quite clearly. They behave differently. TSAR has predominantly preserved its literal meaning and continues to be used mainly to refer to a Russian or sometimes more generally Slavic monarch. Meanwhile, CZAR came to mean something close to a tycoon or magnate, and it came to be consistently used in quite a different kind of construction, like drug czar or anti-terrorism czar, where the noun in preposition nominates an industry or occupation. This semantic peculiarity quite explains why the literal TSAR peaked in the 20s, right after the Russian Revolution, and is now in decline, while the metaphorical CZAR peaked later and is still gaining popularity. Next slide, please. Let us have a closer look at the usages of the two terms in focus. It follows from these sample contexts that, firstly, both terms can be used in the literal meaning of a Russian monarch, well, with that note on regional distribution, of course. And secondly, both terms can be used metaphorically, but in that case, they tend to refer to different things. The dominant metaphorical use for CZAR has already been mentioned, and TSAR features in two kinds of metaphorical models, and both of them echo the models we have already noted for the modern Russian Tsar. Next slide. Thank you. The noted disparity reveals itself also in the structure of collocates for the terms. I shall not list all of them, risking to bore you into sleep, but let us just note a couple of interesting observations. Firstly, note the collocates highlighted in red. They are consistent with the metaphorical usage of CZAR. Note that the negatively charged adjectives in the third layer are much more diverse and frequent than the positively charged ones, fifth layer. And finally, note that the spheres where czars find themselves in charge of tend to be either illegal or aggressive, a kind of metaphorical extension of war. Next slide, please. Well, to sum up our research, I would like to refer to these questions and give some brief answers to them. So, in answer to the first question, we might say that we have seen that the term CZAR has long abandoned the Russian culture discourse and came to be used in culturally neutral context. As to the second question, we can observe that the universal mechanism at work here is unavoidable adaptation of a loan to its new semiotic environment. Any interlanguage transfer triggers a chain of adaptations, by means of which the language and its users claim the borrowing as a separate entity. Yet the new English terms have inheritance, which is not easy to ignore. They retain their association with the ideological enemy, and this endows them with a clear negative tinge. A Colombian czar has nothing to do with Russia, but it is not something you are going to like. And finally, we might note that indisputably we face some kind of semantic diffusion accompanied by a loss of some distinctive features of the original concept, yet we would not wholeheartedly agree with qualifying this process as semantic inflation, that is, gradual loss of semantic value. Rather, it should be seen as an instance of lingual creativity resulting in additional expressive potential associated with the terms in question. Next slide, please. Yes, thank you for your attention, and we shall be happy to answer your questions or to hear your comments.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to offer the audience the opportunity to answer the questions. So, any questions? Colleagues, please. Okay then, dear researchers, then I have a question. So we see that in the analyzed databases, the tonality of the use of both terms is, predominantly negative. So how can we explain this? Well, why is the tonality predominantly negative?
Well, thank you very much for this question. It is a very keen observation indeed. The fact is that this kind of lexical phenomenon is referred to as synonym, synonym. And it is not accidental that synonym and xenophobia have this common beginning, the first common root. So synonyms are very often, well, they very often arise xenophobic attitude, and they are used to arise it on purpose. We had some kind of research, comparative research, and we compared Russian culture-oriented discourse and Japanese culture-oriented discourse, and we noted the same regularities that well, those loans from foreign languages are pretty often used with the negativization, with the purpose of negativization.
Okay, thank you very much. It's just like they well attribute some negative tonality who are speaking about the Russian discourse, yeah? So that's what Alexander Mikhailovich today presented in his speech on the distortions and reframings that are present in modern discourse. Okay, thank you very much. That was a very interesting presentation, in my opinion. Well, does anyone have any other questions to the speakers?
Yeah. May I also ask
yes,
the question? Yelena, indeed, very interesting material. Thank you so much. Just can you explain how do you actually plan to continue your survey? In what kind of direction? I mean, just do you plan to maybe to grab some material of more countries to compare some vision of this word, or just how do you plan to continue your survey?
Well, thank you so much for your question. The fact is that it is by no means a beginning of this kind of research. I am a kind of disciple to Professor Kabakchi, who has been working along these lines for about half a century. And we have attracted various languages. Right now, I'm starting work with my grad student who intends to work on Semitisms. Or rather, I should call them Jews' culture synonyms. And among our plans, the most ambitious one is to make a corpus. So we have been working with American corpus of contemporary American English, VNC, British National Corpus, and the Russian National Corpus, but we want to make a corpus of our own.
Well, that might be an impressive challenge, but still wish you luck in this
challenge
work.
Indeed. Thank you.
Yeah, may I also add something as a co-author? Since I can see that here in this section we have a great number of translators and interpreters who are interested also in this aspect, I would like to add that our research showed that, you know, when we think about the translation and interpreted, we should be aware of so many meanings and connotations of the word. Like as a media slang, it means one thing and it cannot be translated by using Russian website or something like that. Maybe we need Korol or something, or maybe we do not have the word at all, right? To render the meaning of the person in charge of some industry or some position, or like we mentioned that it's a case of lingua creativity, and the word actually continues to gain more and more different meanings. Like even in Urban Dictionary, you can find at least 2 different meanings of the word czar. One is very interesting, like the greatest lady killer that has always been rejected. So how can you translate it? Sure, Russian tsar, will be of the opposite meaning, so it won't be the right word. So so I can say that this problem of translation would be like one more maybe aspect, right, that will also pay attention to.
Well, wholeheartedly wish you luck in your endeavors. Thank you very much. Now let's ask well, the next speakers to present, because well, time is it's always our limitation. So please let's ask then Ekaterina Andreeva from Lomonosov Moscow State University to present a speech. So Ekaterina, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Well,
can you hear me?
Should we stream your presentation?
Well, I can set the presentation myself, if you don't mind.
Irina Evgeniyevna, so then you're welcome to start.
So there are some problems connected with setting presentation. I've sent.
May I help you then?
Okay, then Irina Evgeniyevna might
totally
stream it for you. Well, due to some technical issues, I think it might be more convenient. So Irina Evgeniyevna, would you please help us with streaming, if you can?
Okay, can you see the presentation?
Yes, I can. Well,
thank you.
So, Ekaterina, you're welcome. Aha. So, sadly, Ekaterina has lost the connection. So, please, then we shall ask the next speaker, and then we'll re-invite Ekaterina to continue the speech. So, our next speaker, just wait a couple of seconds for her to reconnect. Maybe that will be resolved. Okay, then. Not to waste the time of the audience, let's ask then, well, then I'll start my presentation. We'll ask Ekaterina in a couple of minutes, so it won't take long. So my presentation today covers the aspect of foreignization and domestication, Russian English legal translation. So then, and then we'll ask Ekaterina to offer her insights into her work. Now, I'll start streaming them, so hopefully you can see it. Irina Evgeniyevna, is it visible?
It is.
It is.
No, that's not it.
It's not it, yeah.
That's not it. Well, just a moment, please. I'll just start. Well, this is it.
It's not visible. It's not visible.
Still not visible. Then once again, please. Well, then, Irina Evgeniyevna, I'll have to ask you to stream it.
Okay, no problem. Just a second.
Due to some technical issues today, we'll ask the moderator to stream it. So, Ekaterina Yurievna is with us. So please, Irina Evgeniyevna, I'll sacrifice my time to let the guests of our conference to speak. So please, if you don't mind, could you please start once again Ekaterina's presentation for us to enjoy her to enjoy her presentation, so we can enjoy the presentation of her research. So Ekaterina, you may start, please. You're most welcome.
Thank you very much. Good evening, dear organizers, speakers, and guests. The topic of my report today is Problems of Text Interpretation in the Era of Globalization, the Socio-Cultural Aspects. To begin with, it should be stated that in modern linguistics, there exist many points of view regarding the issue of text. It is connected with the complexity of the concept itself, as well as with the various fields of knowledge involved in its research. Next slide, please. For instance, from the standpoint of semiotics, text is defined as a meaningful sequence of any signs. This means that text is not only related to verbal communication, but also works of art, music, painting, architecture, etc. In terms of semantics, text is regarded as an ordered set of sentences unified by various types of lexical, logical, and grammatical connections, capable of conveying information organized and directed in a certain way. Here, in this particular report, the text is viewed as a complex whole, functioning as a structural and semantic unity. In addition, text does not only reflect reality, but also communicates about it. The next slide, please. Thus, the concept of text contains three main functions, namely communicative, cognitive, and emotive. Next slide, please. Any text, scientific, literary, poetic, or media text, in any form, oral or written, is a speech product of a representative of a particular culture. This means that each text contains socio-cultural characteristics, since the author creates it in accordance with his mindset, culture, social background, ethical and religious beliefs, and so on. In the modern world, globalization offers many promising opportunities for development of such important niches of learning foreign languages on one hand, and maintenance of cultural heritage on the other hand. In recent years, Russian economic relations with other countries of the world have been strengthening, as well as a large number of international contacts, which is connected with the latest developments in the spheres of science and technology. People now communicate around the world, honing their skills in learning foreign languages. The new high-techs now offer marvelous opportunities for practicing the language in context with real native speakers in all four skills areas in a way that would have been impossible before for the internet, that has become an inseparable part of our lives, satisfying a wide variety of social, information, and communication needs. However, it sometimes seems difficult to understand new information in an adoptive language on account of numerous differences between their cultures. Next slide, please. Well, according to Svetlana Grigorievna Terminasova, the better, quicker, and easier international communication is become technically, the more irritating are the obstacles, namely linguistic and cultural barriers, undermining the possibilities of communicating among nations. The material studied in terms of interpretation within this research relate to different types of contemporary media texts. I mean, news, features, and advertisement. These type of text, media text, is one of the most common forms of modern language use. First, let me define the key terms. Next slide. And here are the key notions: the term translation and interpretation. It is essential to draw a line between these terms. As far as the term translation is concerned, Komisarov defines it as a type of linguistic mediation in which a text is created in a translating language, is communicative equivalent to the original, and its communicative equivalence is manifested in its identification by the receptors of the translation with the original in a functional, content, and structural sense. It should be noted that many contemporary researchers combine the notions of translation and interpretation. In this particular research, by the term interpretation, we mean a comprehensive understanding of the original text aimed at the full content disclosure. According to Psurtsev, to reveal the content means not just to extract meaningful information about the external world, but also to understand the mechanisms of its encoding and to substantiate the relevance and productivity of the techniques and methods of decoding information. When discussing the role of the media in terms of the English-Russian interaction, the deep influence of the English language on Russian should be taken into account. The influence is especially remarkable in the contemporary media texts. For instance, such words as fashion, look, deadline, fake, account, chart, etc. have entered the modern Russian media discourse. On the one hand, the appearance of such new words expands the vocabulary of native speakers of the Russian language. On the other hand, the use of unjustified borrowings with this unjustified use, the Russian language loses its authenticity. Next slide, please. Well, there is an example of such use in translation of an advertising text. We see the phrase fashion store and its Russian translation, fashion отделы. As far as the social cultural problems of interpretation of the English language media texts are concerned, it should be noted that many researchers regard the peculiarities of mentality as one of the main obstacles to adequate interpretation. The system of norms and values, standards of behavior, and the culture of a particular country are reflected in the language, which significantly complicates comprehension. Phraseological units very often act as carriers of such culturally specific components. There exist several possibilities of transferring the content of a phraseological unit from one language to another. Next slide, please. In this example, the translating language contains a phraseological unit that has the same form and meaning. I mean, play with fire, and it is translated into Russian as играли с огнем in the past form, but still lexically they are equivalent. Next slide. Here, in the translating language, there are equivalent phraseological units, and the meaning and stylistic coloring of them are similar to the meaning and coloring of the translated phraseological expressions, while the internal form completely matches in terms of imagery. Here we can see the word combination «BZB», which is translated as «пчела труженица» into Russian. Next slide, please. And here we have a stylistically equivalent phraseological unit with the same meaning, but a completely different form. I mean, a bed of roses is translated as «дела обстоят должным образом», here in the negative sense. Sometimes a translating language does not contain an identical or similar phraseological unit, which becomes the result of translation blunders. Next slide, please. So, like in this example, the translator uses the like black combination «выбросить белое полотенце» to translate through in the towel, which means completely differently. Next slide, please. In this case, the phraseological unit «John Doe» cannot be translated in the absence of background knowledge of the Russian speaker, since John Doe is an obsolete legal term used in a situation where the real plaintiff is unknown or anonymous. Well, the unknown defendant was named Richard Roe, and in the use of the United States law enforcement, this refers to an unidentified body. Next slide, please. And here, in this example, it demonstrated that the translator does not have background knowledge of the idiom used by the English speaker. I mean, Jekyll and Hyde concepts. It is translated as концепциями вампиров или Jekyll и Hyde. Absolute nonsense. The idiom contains the meaning anyone who combines good and evil in this kind of sense. Well, to sum everything up, the examples adduced above demonstrate that the problem of interpretation in modern media texts is relevant in the era of globalization. Interconnection of different languages can sometimes blur the boundaries of the translating language. Moreover, a thorough understanding of the meaning of the contemporary media text requires a certain set of background knowledge that forms gradually in the process of socialization. Being an integral part of an interpretive chain, it allows the interpreter to identify culturally marked units correctly, helping to provide representatives of the Russian-speaking culture with an adequate perception of a foreign text. Next slide. Now, thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Ekaterina Yuryevna. So let's ask the audience about the questions. So do you have any questions to Ekaterina Yuryevna? Anything to add? Maybe some comments on difficulties of translation?
I have a question. Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
I have a question. It's Elena Beloglazova. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much for this presentation. Loads of interesting material and keen observations. But I wanted the speaker to probably a little bit elaborate on this quotation. I quote, "Russian language loses its authenticity." So speaking about borrowings from English into Russian, speaking about influence of English onto Russian, you will draw this conclusion that Russian ceases to be Russian, well, almost. Is it really so? Because Russian has a long history of loans and foreign influences, and still it is Russian and is великий и могучий. So what do you mean?
Well, thank you very much for the question. By the words that the Russian language loses its authenticity, I mean that nowadays the range of these foreign lexical borrowings is expanding. And even if there are a lot of equivalents in the Russian language to express the meaning in the truest way, the Russians prefer to just borrow the word, this or that term, which sometimes seems ridiculous in translation. Like, for instance, the word like fashion отделы, in Russian, it would be substituted for like модные отделы or отделы моды. This is my point of view, that some borrowings are inappropriate.
Oh, okay, colleagues. As we have just a few minutes left, welcome you. Well, hopefully this will trigger a scientific discussion between the participants, and you may discuss the this problem is just like as old as the language. Should we borrow or not, and to what extent? So. I'm all in for a balanced approach. So sometimes borrowings are, not the way out. Sometimes they are really necessary. So if you, let me start presenting my research. So just we'll have to give you insights into legal language, and then that's it, because we just have 3 minutes till the end of this session, and I'd like to present just 1 or 2 slides about legal English. So as I specialize in legal translation, my topic is foreignization and domestication in Russian English legal translation. And could you please open slide number 6 right away, just for us to have time. First of all, legal translation, as any ESP translation, is a very problematic thing. So it might be subject to machine translation, but there are certain limitations. And working for quite a long time with different legal texts, so different, so to say, types. Well, I, in the course of this research, analyzed different corpora of texts, which actually, and some observations. I would like to present some observations of mine in this. So the key slide in this presentation will be the recommendations on the choice of translation strategy. And we know that basically there are 2 types of translation strategies, like foreignization and domestication. We know that, that actually continues your discussion to some extent, because, foreignization, it's like when we retain the Russian equivalents, the equivalents that are like so natural for the Russian legal practitioners. And when we domesticate, we just try to use universally accepted language of the native speakers of English in the context of different legal documents. So, and to sum it up, I have just a few minutes left, so I'd like to offer some, could you please return to the previous slide? Actually, to cut a long story short, it depends on the type of document. So some documents are documents that are to convey the language of power. And it is, these documents should be foreignized, so we should retain the Russian meanings. If we translate them into English, we should retain the Russian meanings. The careful attitude to the more formal aspects of legal language should not be used as a purism, but, well, it might be a reasonable precaution taken by a translator to secure the original text's coherence and semantics and prevent terminological inconsistencies. Well, you see, the cost of mistaken legal translation is much higher than in literature or, well, elsewhere. So that's why I believe that if we, like, properly foreignize the translation of Russian documents, that's a safe bet. That's the safe bet. At the same time, domestication is sometimes a good and viable strategy in translation of more standardized documents, just like contracts, corporate documents, and different products of legal practice, like memoranda, legal opinions, case briefs, textbooks, and periodicals. So that's it. That's, in short, my research. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. Some examples are in the screen. If you're interested, I'll send the presentation to you via email. And that's it. Well, we are out of time now. So if you have any questions, just ask. Well, in legal translation, my recommendation is to choose the balanced approach between foreignization and domestication strategies, depending on the type of legal document. That's it. So, Irina Evgenievna, should we finalize this session then?
Yes, it's time.
Oh, it's time. So, sadly, it's high time to finalize this session. Well, thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you very much for being with us.
We were very glad to see all of you during this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You've done a good job moderating it.
Thank you so much.